Okay, so let's talk first about the idea of an iceberg moment in general, which is this is the tip of the iceberg that peaks up above the surface of your conscious level, right?
Yeah.
So it's these statements that are your limiting beliefs. Now, the mass of an iceberg, what took the Titanic out wasn't what they could see, it was what was under the water level. And the same is true for us in that we can see ourselves saying these things verbally. Maybe you say them, sometimes you say them out loud, sometimes it's verbally in your own head.
Yeah.
So there's a little definition on that, but we can see them. But what's propping that belief up is a big mass of not ice, but stories. So a verbal iceberg moment is any of those statements that just like I know one that I struggled with for a really long time, and I'm actually have been using this. You know, it's good when you use your own method on yourself.
Always.
That
Always.
it says something, right? But I don't have enough time, or I'm terrible with time, or I'm not. I don't have enough time. I'm not going to be able to do it all.
Yeah.
And that is just, and I say it to myself when I'm walking home from spin class. I say it to myself right at the end of a day as I'm getting ready for the next day. I say it to myself in the showers. I'm getting ready for the day that's about to come. And so that anytime I hear that in my head, or I say it out loud, I say it to my team member, I say it to my husband, I say it, I'm like, oh, wait. What are the stories that are holding that up? And more importantly, again, it's kind of like one of those red flags. What are the stories that I should tell, that I can tell myself, that I can choose to tell myself, that show that I have as much time as I ever need?
Who are the world's most interesting people? And what fascinating, groundbreaking, incredible things can they teach us? In this new series, I leave our Science of People lab to interview my favorite authors, experts, and celebrities for them to share their best people hacks, social skills, and stories. And let me tell you, they have some juicy tips. This is a new series I'm calling The World's Most Interesting People.
Hello, YouTube friends. Today we're talking about your stories, and not just your stories, but stories to change your inner critic. I know I have one. Kindra's on the show today. Hey, hi, Kindra.
Hey, good to see you.
Okay, let me brag about Kindra for a second. If you don't know her, today's guest is a bestselling author and the former chief storytelling officer, such a cool title, of Success Magazine, whose work and research teaches individuals and brands to harness and leverage the power of their stories. Her first book, which I love, Stories That Stick, debuted at #2 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and Forbes said it may be the most valuable business book you read. Incredible. Inc. said of her newest book, Choose Your Story, Change Your Life, is the business book you need to read in 2022. I totally agree. She's based in New York City with her husband, 2 children, and their puppy named Space Dog. Please welcome author and storytelling expert, Kindra Hall. Woo!
Hey, so happy to be here. Hi, everyone.
Kindra, I'm such a huge fan. I know that all of my viewers will be a huge fan too, because we're talking about something that's incredibly important. And the very first thing I want to kick off with is what you mentioned in your subtitle. So I didn't mention this, but the subtitle here is, this just hooked me. Choose your story, change your life. Silence your inner critic and rewrite your life from the inside out. Can you talk to me about inner critics? I know I have one. She's really loud. Am I the only one?
No. And in fact, I would argue that inner critic is actually part of our evolution, our biology, part of what makes us human. It's the voice that wants to keep us safe. It's the voice that is like, hey, look out, there are threats here, there are threats there, and wants to keep us on the straight and narrow, live to see another sunrise, sunset path. And the inner critic, really, depending on how much credit you give it, how much room you give it to run in your life, will dictate your decisions, your actions, and ultimately the life that you have, and whether or not that's the life you want or not.
So this idea is so important because basically you're tying in our stories that we tell ourselves with our inner critic. And I was hoping that we could talk about maybe one of your first aha moments, if that's okay. Did you have a story that, I know you talk about some amazing examples in the book, a story that was like the first time where you realized, wait a minute, I'm telling myself something and maybe I can change it. And that's really what we're talking about today, is not only identifying the stories, but how to change them. Did you have like a a moment where you're like, that is a story I got to change?
Yeah, I've had a series of them my whole life, but one that really stands out actually was right after my wedding, right after my honeymoon, and I had gotten in great shape for my wedding. I felt really good, and then on the honeymoon, I just ate everything that I could possibly see. Yeah, Cheetos for breakfast. Why not? I mean, I know.
Oh, you went
I'm
there.
telling you, I am an
like,
overachiever.
Burrata? Pesto pasta? You're like Doritos.
No, I was in Hawaii and I was eating Cheetos. Okay. Like I go all in. So by the end of the honeymoon, I called my girlfriend who had been saying, you need to come to a spin class with me. You're going to love a spin class. And I'd never exercised. I was never an exerciser. And I mean, I'm not a person who can get away with never exercising. So here I am on my honeymoon. I feel disgusting. I call her. I'm like, all right, I'll go to the spin class with you. And I remember going in, I felt like, if you've ever walked into any sort of group fitness class for the very first time, it's so intimidating. It's really intense. Yeah.
Yes.
And like, you can hear.
And the stories, it's like sensory overload, right? You're like, It smells like bodies and BO, but it looks like a nightclub. And I'm in really tight clothes. I'm so cold. But wait a minute, there's flashing lights, like a lot.
And it's such a prime opportunity anytime you're doing anything new for those self stories to appear. It's a breeding ground for it. Mm-hmm. So I go into this class and I have goals, right? I have goals that I want to achieve, mainly just to like
survive,
shave off the Cheetos. Yeah, that's fine. It's fine. But even as I like clipped into the bike, even those first few steps, more so than the physical exertion, my mind was working in overload of, who do you think you are? You look like a fool. You are not an athlete. You don't know what you're doing. Everyone's making fun of you. This is terrible. Like, it was to the point where, I mean, I would have just passed out and never have been shown my face there again. Mm-hmm. But now, as fate would have it, there was a woman who was really wonderful and encouraging and says, hey, you should come back tomorrow. And so just by happenstance, I came back because of that encouragement. But what I realized was happening was that part of this inner critic, it wasn't just saying, you don't belong here, you can't do this. It was replaying stories from my childhood of my inability to be an athlete, like physical fitness testing day. I don't know if you had this.
Oh no, I was sick on those days. Like, I knew when those days were, they would count your push-ups and your sit-ups. You'd have to run the mile.
Yes. Pull-ups. And I have a vivid memory of of not being able to do a single one. And the whole class was standing there. So I remember exactly the bar on the playground where this was happening. And so it was stories of field day and always being like, I'm reliving some of them right now. So I could see all of them. And they were just showing up as these limiting beliefs, these statements that you don't belong here. And so I then decided, as I went back to spin class the next day, to start using some of the stories in that room that weren't mine, because I didn't have any to rely on, but to choose watching some of the people in the room as inspiring stories. Like, oh, wow, look at how they can do that. I'm going to follow them. And then each time I felt stronger, had some success in spin class, I cataloged it as, remember that time that you didn't fall off the bike, or you didn't. And so they became stories of success. Now it's 13 years later. We just celebrated our 13th wedding anniversary, and spin class is one of my very favorite things to do. It's so funny. I just got on the stage the other day, and a woman, the organizer, said to me, were you an athlete in high school? And I was like, no. And she said, you just look so strong. So I didn't even realize, it's like a full circle moment. But I was letting the stories from a long time ago dictate how I felt in that class, until I made a conscious decision to choose different stories to get me through it and to where I am today.
So it sounds like there's sort of two sides of this. And I think that both are powerful. So people who are listening, I felt like this when I was reading the book, is the first is identifying the stories that you're already telling yourself, right? Like, what are those stories? Where did they come from? Are they true? That's one part. And you walk us through how to do that, which I want to talk about. The second part is also creating new stories to overwrite the old stories. And actually, both of those are good. Do you have to do one before the other? Or like, can you start with the rewriting? But can you start with the rewriting before you would do the identification? Or is it in order?
I kind of think, I mean, I suppose you could start with choosing better stories with the rewriting, but the intention really comes when you identify a limiting belief, an old story that's holding you back, and say, whoa, I've been letting this dictate my decisions and my life for way too long and there's been no checks or balances on it. I'm going to now intentionally, actively choose better stories. So I think, yeah, it maybe does go in order.
Okay, so that's very helpful because I wanted to ask about a specific example. Your 4 money scripts.
Mm-hmm,
So like, I think there's stories everywhere. So there's stories that you talk about this, and there's every kind of story we're telling us about our gym, about our work, about our success, about our parenting.
Yeah.
I'm a mother of a 4-year-old. You have 2 kids. There's a lot of stories that happen with that. Talk to me about the money scripts one. In what are these money scripts and how can we begin to kind of uncover them?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, these stories show up in all areas of our life, as you said. And I don't think there is anything more storied than money and what money is and what it means and what it can be. So part of this process in its essence is self-awareness, because you can't change something that you're not aware of. Right. And so I identify 4 key money stories that you should like questions you can ask yourself about money that will help you to determine if, wait a minute, am I telling myself a story about money that isn't serving me? So one of them is, where does money come from? Right. Because we all have stories about where money comes from, which then directly impacts how we feel that we can have access to it.
So a perfect example. So I was doing this exercise and I realized that and this is a terrible story I'm about to share. It was like, oh, that's not great. That needs some rewriting, which is, I feel like money comes from suffering. In other words, if I have a speaking event that I want to do, I shouldn't be paid for it. But if I have a speaking event that's 2 connections away, really hard, really early morning, an audience I don't really know, well, then I can get paid for it.
Yes, exactly. And so what is that connection? Like, money comes from suffering. Money comes from overexertion. Money. What does that do in your life? And you have all these stories. There are probably some from your childhood where, like that was, I know one growing up for me was like, you can work really, really hard and never have enough money. Right. Like you can, so which makes me like, oh, I'm not working hard enough if I want more money. So where does money come from? Really important, because now I'm sure even realizing that you're thinking, hold on. So then your choice can be, wait, here's a story of a time where I made money and it was so fun and I loved it. And but we don't think about those stories. Those aren't our defaults. Those aren't our defaults. A really important story about money, which sounds so crazy, is the story about how much money you have. Because this isn't like, again, money doesn't exist in our relationship with it, doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so how much money you have is so often tied to how much money other people have as well.
Of course.
And so like it's amazing how many people I've talked to where they're like, we don't have enough money, or there's how much money everybody else has. But then when they actually sit down and look at it, they have all the money, right? Like,
yes.
And then but then that shift of the story of how much money you have, if you're looking for someone who's looking for gratitude or abundance or even just satisfaction in your life, that it could be all about the story there. How much money you need is another story, and what you need it for. And then the last one is, this is really important, how money should be used. And anytime you have stories that include the word should in it, those are stories that need to be evaluated, because should is a red flag.
We got to pause. Your stories that involve should. So when you hear yourself saying should, that's a moment for a pause and reflection. That is a super good, red flag. Yes. Sorry. I had to call that out, because that's, if you're having trouble,
it's so true.
I don't know my stories. No, just anytime you say the word should to yourself, wait a minute. Should I? Do I? Where does this come from? Is it true?
Like I should have, it's something as simple as I should have my child's birthday party on the weekend immediately following their birthday.
Yeah. Oh,
So where does that come from? That probably comes from when your birthday parties happened,
100%.
or maybe when the people around you are hosting their kids' birthday parties. Or could it happen the week before? Could it happen right? Like there's should is a definite story red flag for money stories and all stories.
Okay, so this brings me perfectly to the next question. So I want to actually read this because I found it so powerful. So you talk about verbal and emotional iceberg moments.
Mm-hmm.
So in a second, I want you to define them, but you have some really good examples. I just want to read a couple. I'll never live up to my potential. I don't matter. I'm unlucky. I'm just lucky. I'm failing my kids. I'm bad with money. Nothing works out for me. Mm-hmm. How are these verbal iceberg moments? And what's the difference between a verbal and an emotional one?
Okay, so let's talk first about the idea of an iceberg moment in general, which is this is the tip of the iceberg that peaks up above the surface of your conscious level, right? Yes. So it's these statements that are your limiting beliefs. Now, the mass of an iceberg, what took the Titanic out wasn't what they could see, it was what was under the water level. And the same is true for us in that we can see ourselves saying these things verbally. Maybe sometimes you say them out loud, sometimes it's verbally in your own head. Yeah. So there's a little definition on that, but we can see them. But what's propping that belief up is a big mass of not ice, but stories. So a verbal iceberg moment is any of those statements that just like, I know one that I struggled with for a really long time, and have been using this. It's good when you use your own method on yourself. Always. It says something, right? But I don't have enough time, or I'm terrible with time, or I'm not, I don't have enough time. I'm not going to be able to do it all.
Yeah.
And that is just, and I say it to myself when I'm walking home from spin class. I say it to myself right at the end of a day as I'm getting ready for the next day. I say it to myself in the showers. I'm getting ready for the day that's about to come. And so that anytime I hear that in my head, or I say it out loud, I say it to my team member, I say it to my husband, I say it, I'm like, oh, wait. What are the stories that are holding that up? And more importantly, again, it's kind of like one of those red flags. What are the stories that I can tell myself, that I can choose to tell myself, that show that I have as much time as I ever need? I mean, here's the deal. I go on vacation tomorrow. Nothing like the day before a vacation to feel like you don't have enough time to get it all done. But don't we always get it all done? Yeah. So I am telling myself the stories of previous vacations I've gone on when I got everything done I needed to get done. So those are the verbals. Those are those statements. Yeah. And again, they become these, they're again, like red flags to be like, oh, wait, there could be a
habitual.
Story here.
And like, sometimes I even find myself saying, I was like, oh, I say some of these like all the time without even thinking about, which only cements the thought. Mm-hmm. I think the more, and there's an aspect of your book is like, let's look at what we're doing accidentally or on autopilot, and let's not ingrain that. Right. So I think that the more we say that to our kids, our partners, our employee, our team members, ourselves, we're just saying that's true. That's really, really true. And so a lot of it is like questioning some of our autopilot statements to make them work for us. Sorry, and for emotional moments too.
No, I love this because these are our self stories are automated. It's a system of our body that our brain said, you know what? I got this. I'm going to take care of your blood. I'm going to take care of your breathing. I got your digestion under control, and the stories you tell yourself, I'm going to take care of that too. But the problem is it's not aligned with our modern day goals, right? And so if you just leave it on autopilot, it collects and then it props up these limiting beliefs that we don't attend to. And then we are where we are. So those are the verbal. And then emotional are anytime you get like that, a feeling, like a flash of a feeling, where it's a feeling of maybe it's fear, maybe it's a flash of anxiety. It's like these anger, any of these, I call them unidentified flying emotions, right? And have you ever had that happen where you were like, you do something, you read something, you're like, oh, I feel bad. And then you come back, you're like, wait, I felt bad about something. What did I feel bad about?
100%. In my inbox. That happens all the time where I'll be like, this, you get back from like you're in the morning or after lunch, you're like, check, archive, check. And then you're like, why do I feel horrible? And I have to go back and look at what email made me feel horrible, because it's like, I didn't even register what it was.
Yep. And within that email, they were probably asking you for something like, oh, can you do this? And it probably was a question that triggered one of your verbal limiting beliefs, which is, I don't have enough time. I'm not good enough. I'm rigid. I don't like to do new things. So if they're asking me to do something new, I don't know how to handle that. Right. So that's another thing where anytime you get this flash of emotion, it's an opportunity for you to pause the automation and be like, where this is coming from a story. What story is it? And then you can go into the process of analyzing it. Is it true? Where did it come from? Does this story serve me?
So I like how you reframe that. And before we wrap up, I just want to reframe it for everyone, which is you said it's an opportunity. And I think that a lot of the times I see my negative emotions, anger, fear, I would consider those negative, which actually they're not, but that's how I label them, as bad things, as distractions, as things that are getting me slow, is keeping me back. But actually, maybe they're opportunities. That maybe when you hear yourself say should, it's not bad. You're not bad or wrong. That's an opportunity to see something. If you have an unidentified emotional object flying through you, I think I did that wrong, but yours is much better. Well said. Yeah, that like you're like, oh wait, opportunity. I'm angry. Wow, whoa, okay, all right. Well, that's an opportunity, as opposed to, oh, it's bad. I want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So, with that, like this, we've given people some really practical tools. Is there one thing that you just want to leave people with that they can do right now or think of right now as like a final challenge?
Yeah, I would say number one is to find opportunities in your day to pause the automation. If you have one of those emotions, or if you catch yourself in one of those statements, to just stop for a second there and say, all right, what is happening here? And then the other thing that I would recommend, and maybe it's just a piece of advice, is that don't beat yourself up about this. This is part of being a human. What we're working on here is actually a reprogramming of what those automations are. And so to trust that you may have, this isn't called change your story. These stories have happened to you. These things have happened to you. But there are stories within your experience as well that you can choose to tell yourself instead. And this isn't like you don't, and I want to make it clear, like this isn't visualization or affirmation. This is just remembering. This is just choosing to look back on your life and be like, wait, I feel like I don't belong. Here's a story of me belonging. Here's a story of me creating community. Here's a story of, and then choosing to tell yourself those stories because they're there.
Okay, so this is so beautiful. The takeaway is, one, begin to create a repository, a place where you put the good stories. Don't just think of them, they're going to leave your head. Write them down, find a place, put them in a phone note, have a little folder, create a beautiful little notebook. I want you to write them down. And second is, this also could be a logistical thing. I tend to overbook myself, of course. So there's no opportunities for me to pause. And what I've started to do after your book is, like even today, I had an interview right after us, and I asked them if we could start 15 minutes later. They're like, yeah, no problem. Because I was like, you know what? Like, I need to start building this into my schedule. So maybe consider having your meetings start on off hours. Mm-hmm. Your calls or meetings at 10 minutes after the hour, 15 minutes after, even 5 minutes after the hour, just to give yourself like a little extra few minutes. So that if your meeting starts at 3:05, from 3 o'clock to 3:05, that's a pause moment. Right? Like, even if you're not on a previous call. And so we can't do these on autopilot. We will not get those pauses by themselves. It's going to take work, but that work is so, so worth it.
I love that. And in those pauses, you can be filling those pauses with reflecting on positive stories that have just happened, or preparing yourself, telling yourself great stories for whatever's coming up next.
So we barely talked about all the issues and topics, the frameworks in here. Kindra walked us through just a couple of steps. If you want to get the full framework, if you really want to learn how to really begin to diagnose and find these stories and how insidious they are, some of them are really wrapped up into our identity. We have to actually do the work. So I highly, highly recommend the book. I absolutely loved it. As you can see, I took a ton of notes. It really just got me doing as opposed to passively worrying or thinking. So I want to encourage you to do in the comments below. Let us know if you have a story that you want to rewrite that you're working on. I would love to read it. And I would also love your vulnerability and your openness. Kindra, I want to thank you so much for being on with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing out the best of me. That's a gift. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. My pleasure. Thank you so much for watching. Give this video a like, give us a subscribe, and I can't wait to read your comment. Bye.
Don't forget to check out all of these goodies.